Fundamental things. Good afternoon. We're back at the House Committee on Government Operations, Military Affairs, taking up, renewing our conversation with the latest and greatest draft of H97, our committee's elections bill. And Tim Devlin is here to walk us through the changes in draft number 1.2. Before he does that, I have heard loud and clear that many folks on our committee have trouble with the write-in candidates provisions, the write-in consent form provisions, and some of the consequences that we talked about this morning around that. So this draft of the bill has essentially two major changes. One is that it removes all of the write-in consent form requirement pieces. So that's big change number one. Big change number two is that with correspondence, some of the testimony that we had last week, the fix on the campaign finance piece between candidates and parties, I think it's pretty clear that we want to put a cap on that and just raise that cap to something that will still encourage candidates to file campaign contributions that are actually directly to them and have them show what they're filing to the party without going through a PAC or doing another legal end run that, while a lot of the activity that we see is with the letter of the law, it violates kind of the spirit of it. So those are the two big changes, and I'll have Tim walk us through the words on the page.
Thank you very much, Chair McCarthy, and good afternoon, committee members. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. The first, before you have draft 1.2 of the strike all amendment to H97. The first substantive change from what you were reviewing this morning occurs on page 3 at the top. Again, I've highlighted anything that has been altered for the most part, except for omissions, which have been removed, and there's nothing to highlight. Just want to note that. So we have, this is in campaign finance limits for state candidates. This is at the bottom of page 2, just to orient everybody. Section 4, amending Title 17 VSA, Section 2941A. Let's see, reads subsection A, in any election, skipping some text to subdivision 5A, a political party shall not accept contributions totaling more than, and I'll just skip down to the relevant part at the top of page 3, which is highlighted. Let's see, subsection B, subdivision B, a political party shall not accept contributions totaling more than $100,000 from a candidate. I'll pause there.
Seems pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And just like to note that the next section, which pertains to minimum thresholds, is now in section 10. The previous sections 10 through 14 were either removed in whole or were removed in whole, with the exception of the minimums, which now appear in section 10. And that can be found on page 7 now. And I just like to make a quick note that the reader assistance heading on line 4, I've made a note to modify that so that it'll read just minimum thresholds or write-in minimum thresholds in primary elections, removing the candidate registration form, which is no longer strictly accurate. Section 10 has much the same language as appears in H97, Representative Shai's bill, and reads essentially the same, but now is missing what was a new subdivision A1. And I can just read through that if you'd like, Chair McCarthy, or maybe pause for either questions or direct it to Director Senning to answer any, provide additional context or something like that, but I'd be happy to read that through now as well.
I have a question.
Representative Chase.
Tim, am I reading this correctly? It's like a self-referential loop. A write-in candidate shall not qualify as primary winner unless the candidate has complied with subsection A of this section, which is?
Yes, I apologize. That's a oversight. That should be removed.
Okay. Does that mean everything just basically moves up one subcategory?
Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you.
So line 10 is, we just need to get rid of.
Goes back, yeah.
Because we removed this, we get.
And then 2 bumps to 1
Right.
with the A, B, C sections.
But the intent here is that we have the thresholds we discussed this morning, but absent all of the other language about needing to file a consent form. So we're.
I'm only here.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Chair? We have 1 minute
Yeah, please.
of Tim. I noticed that
Sure.
the second clause, which was existing language, is struck through, and I know it was in the draft before. I was going to raise this before. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to what I'm referring to. It's the stricken through language on lines 15 and 16 on page 7.
Yes, that reads, except that if write-in candidate receives more votes than a candidate whose name is printed on the ballot, he or she may qualify as a primary winner, correct?
Right.
Okay.
I don't recall discussion, Mr. Chair, about this language or it being requested to be taken out. I can tell you it operates such that in the case where there is a named candidate, typically the threshold for write-in candidates becomes an issue when there's no named candidate on the ballot.
Right.
Because as you all are well aware, usually the named candidate gets well more votes than any write-in. In cases where there's a named candidate on the ballot and the write-in does get more, I just called to the committee's attention whether they want to keep that language that in that case, the candidate would still prevail, the write-in candidate, even if not meeting that minimum threshold.
Yeah, I wasn't paying attention as closely as you were, Director, sending to that particular piece, but I think we should remove the strike and keep the language. If a named candidate can't get as many votes as a write-in candidate, I think they duly deserve to be the winner. I did not understand that that was what we had done by striking that language. So even if they don't meet the minimum threshold, yes, Representative Chase.
So an example would be if somebody was running for state rep, there was a named candidate on the ballot, they got 20 votes, a write-in got 30 votes. They're both below the threshold of 50
Yes.
or 51. Then in that case, the write-in would get the nomination.
Yes, exactly. And without such provision, as you can see, you'd be saying that the named candidate won with less votes.
Okay.
Very rare, but I have seen it happen before, and I've even seen it happen at your House rep level.
Yeah, so on this section, Tim, I think so unless the committee corrects me here, I think what would like to do is obviously make the correction on line 10, move everything up, and then we'll restore the language, so remove the strike on lines 14 through 16.
Okay.
If the named candidate loses to a write-in candidate, I think the issue that I was trying to solve with the threshold is kind of moot. That seems like a very unlikely. That seems like a very unlikely scenario, but you know we've got to belt and suspenders with the law here. Representative Waters Evans, do you have a question?
Just to clarify, so removing the strike would ensure that the person who gets the most vote is the winner.
Correct.
Got it.
That's my understanding. Right. Well, Will's giving you the thumbs up. All right.
Just wanted to be sure.
Okay. Questions about the words on the page for these two sections that are changed? Representative Nugent.
How does this affect the write-in votes that are like recorded or not? Is that,
So by removing all of those provisions that we had in the bill, we're dispensing with the idea that I believe was the most, subject of most of our conversation this morning. So now with this version of the bill, that entire idea of a consent form for a write-in candidate being a qualifying event is gone. The consequences that we talked about of removing the possibility that someone who didn't file could be a candidate, that's gone out of the bill. So everything reverts back to normal sort of today, underlying statute in this version, as it relates to write-ins, except if the threshold is higher, as it was in H97. And the only modification I would say, Tim, in H97, I believe all it did was move it so that the threshold went from half of the petition signatures to the full number. And I've added this additional idea, largely because of what happened in the Franklin County elections this past primary, of saying the higher of 10% of the ballots cast in that primary or the signature threshold. So in a lot of our like legislative primaries down at our level, some of the party ballots, I think there's usually just a couple or 300 or 400. So 10% for a lot of us, 50 is actually higher than 10%. Mm-hmm. But countywide, when we see write-ins, those are often less than 10%. And one of my key principles that I'm trying to really focus on here is this idea that it should really mean something when you get that nomination, especially if it's your second nomination. So you've named yourself on the ballot, you've declared sort of who you are, what you affiliate with, you win that primary, and you're looking for that second nod. Absent the party itself, party committee, et cetera, nominating you because there's a vacancy, you would really, I think we want to have a higher threshold based on what I've seen in our recent elections. So that was a long-winded way of saying we took all that stuff out.
But Mr. Chair, can I add just a little more wind to that long wind?
Yes, please.
I promise it's really short. Just because of the nature of Representative Evans' question was, what does it do to write-ins? I just want to make clear what the status quo is. You're right. We've taken everything out related to that brings us back to the current status quo. And that is that the clerks and the local election officials will now continue to be required to write the names and the vote totals of every person written in on every race at every point in the process, their tally sheet, their summary sheet, their election night reporting, and their official return of vote. The only exceptions to that are deceased and fictional characters that are recorded as blank.
Fictional characters don't apply. That takes care of the Bugs Bunny issue. Yeah.
So Will, right now as it is, names that even appear to be a real person would be reported, but names that are obviously a cartoon character or something to that effect are accounted as blank.
Your Mickey Mouses and your Abraham Lincolns, but exactly, a name you don't recognize, but appears to be a real live person, every other case is recorded and reported.
What about like a Hulk Hogan, which is basically a character and in no way, shape, or form obviously a resident of a district?
That's a judgment call of the clerk. Hulk Hogan to me is a real person. I'd say look.
Is it a stage name? Okay, sorry. I just this one tweaks me out of that.
Stage name?
John Wayne. Ceased.
For clarity, Hulk Hogan's name is Terry Jean Bollea.
I told you it was a stage name. I told you it was a stage player.
Representative Chase, I have to ask, did you know that or did you Google it?
No, he just Googled it.
Okay, all right.
That's IT working overtime over there.
Just had to ask.
Next time you do that, don't give me a sip of something.
John Loops.
Okay. So any further questions about these changes? Because what I'd like to do is just take a brisk walkthrough with Tim, just to remind folks of what sections are still in this draft that we didn't change since the last draft, but I just want us to holistically look at the thing in total and walk through it together. So Tim, would you guide us on a tour of what is left in draft number 1.2?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And just for clarification, a line by line walkthrough, correct?
Yes.
Or more
Yes, let's do a line by line. We don't need to. So what I would say is we can do more of a paragraph by paragraph than a line by line and stuff that we've been over today. So it can be. We don't need to read every word that's on the page,
Okay.
but if I want to have the committee sort of look at each piece, sit with it, understand that piece that we've looked at in various versions. I'm cognizant of the fact that in a bill that we've been updating and making some edits and compromises on, sometimes it can sort of get lost which pieces are left in the draft. And I don't want anybody to accuse me of sort of sliding something in at the last minute. I think that other than the piece we did yesterday on electronic returns, which seemed to be a consensus piece, we've been whittling away at the sections primarily. Representative Hooper.
How quickly do you think we can get Barbara Murphy to testify?
You know what? I was just about to find a way.
For the love of God, I was thinking the same thing. So, do you want to?
All right. So
She's like a John Rogers.
here's what I would like. Let's pause for just a moment on that, Representative Hooper. I have been asked by several folks to testify or get the voice of an independent to talk about the movement of the independent filing deadline up. I am hesitant to have sitting members come and testify and grow this committee because pretty soon we'd have 150 people working on our bill, and that's not how we do business in the State House. I also think it's valuable to have that perspective. So I've reached out to a couple of independent candidates, haven't gotten availability, and this is something that came up this week and haven't been able to find anybody, but Barbara Murphy, former Representative Murphy, would be a great voice to add to our conversation. And I believe, Andrea, that I think I have her contact information. I'll try to send it to you now. So Representative Hooper, that's a great suggestion. I will forward some contact info to Andrea and she will do her magic. If she could come in today or tomorrow morning, that would be lovely. Today. Okay. Tim, are you still scheduled in Senate Gov.Ops? I don't want to keep you here.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, let me pull up that schedule.
I think what we could do is take a break. I have about 30 things that I need to do. I'm sure other representatives do too. And we could reconvene to just do a orientation section by section when you're done in Senate Gov.Ops before we have to go to floor.
Okay. And let's see, I should be in Senate Gov.Ops 2:15 to 2:45, but knowing that they always they tend to run a little delayed, I'd say maybe 3 o'clock, 3:15.
Okay, we'll be on the floor.
Sure.
We'll be on the floor. So I think what I'll do is give the committee a break. Floor is going to be really short. So we'll come back with you for maybe half an hour at approximately 3:45 after we're off the floor. Tim, will that
Yes,
work
that sounds good.
for your schedule? Okay. All right. That'll give me time to look for the independent voice that we desperately need in this conversation and make sure that we are working working on another piece. So Tim, I'll let you go. Will, I'll let you go. Thank you both so much for the time today. Committee, one more thing before we break. I am working with stakeholders to try to find a path on the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission language. We've heard some very strong opinions around the category A versus category B issue. Law enforcement has a perspective. The Network for the Prevention of Domestic and Sexual Violence has a perspective. Attorney General has a perspective. I would really like to try to move that, but I think it needs at least a couple more days. Had that on the schedule for tomorrow. I just wanted to let folks know stakeholders are talking, and I'm hoping that we can move that next week, but that will not be on our schedule tomorrow. So just wanted to let the committee know that we're trying to work through, trying to get the stakeholders to come to a place where everybody feels good, and it's an important issue and I don't want to lose it, but I also want to try to find a consensus path if we can. So just didn't want anybody to be surprised by that. Representative Pango.
So is tomorrow's schedule then the elections bill at 8:30 in the morning, then the floor, then we're not going to hear about anything, the changes to law enforcement officer training?
That's right. We're not going to,
Okay.
we're not going to do that piece tomorrow. That's exactly it. Yeah, I'm going to try to find the common ground before we get back on it as a committee.
So then we still do have to meet at 8:30 tomorrow morning, is my question.
I will figure that out while we're on break.
Okay.
And if I can make it later, I absolutely will. But I'm cognizant of the fact that we have a fun field trip to our state archives tomorrow afternoon. We want to make sure we get our work done in advance of that. And I know Andrew's been looking at the logistics of how we're going to get there. So do you have any news that's fit to print yet from our Senate colleagues?
So the committee system is going to probably per committee and we're going to talk, figure out.
It's in Middlesex.
Just go over here and go home after.
Email from
Give an email.
earlier this afternoon.
I will be coming back here. So I am willing to take me +3. So a third of the committee could go in my ride. I can get a ride back here.
It's in Middlesex? Because I would probably just, unless we had something to do back here, I'd probably, because that's already
Yeah.
Oh, true.
We
heading the right
will have to
direction.
Back after that tomorrow. I'm
Yeah,
headed north.
so I'm not coming back.
So
either.
who would drive themselves and then continue north? Okay. Okay, but that's,
I'm indifferent.
okay, so it sounds like,
I'm the only southerner, aren't I?
it sounds like if we had two volunteer drivers, we would get everybody who's not, and maybe just one based on those numbers. So, all right, well, I think,
I'm happy to take someone.
yeah, so I'm happy to take folks too. So I think we'll be able to figure this out easily because most folks are headed in that direction.
From Andrew.
Well,
All right.
You've ridden in a Volvo before? Exciting.
not enough.
Okay, great.
like
Well,
car.
we'll take a break. I'll see you all up on the floor and then we'll come back here to